Hello, welcome back to part 8 of the Skeet shooting tutorials. In this part of the tutorial, we're going to set up the UI for the RPG and the PSM. Specifically, we're going to build the UI that shows that we are recharging that particular weapon. We'll also put away the weapon and then make it so that we can't fire during that time. Now, in past tutorials, we've brought in the UI already for the PSM and the rocket shape. I'm going to bring these both in here to just get started. So I'll create a UI image. That UI image, I'm going to let's put the rocket shape in this first one. This will be our RPG foreground. We'll just do foreground. Again, with this, I'm also going to make sure and hold Shift and Alt down, lock it down in the bottom left. Now, with this 6-shooter, it looks like I moved it up by 10 in Y, so I'll go ahead and move this one up by 10 in Y as well. But what I do want to do is make sure that I'm moving everything from that bottom left as the anchor. It becomes super critical that I'm moving it from the bottom left as the anchor. All right. Meanwhile, let me just take this one, I'll duplicate it, and this will become my PSM foreground. And I'm just going to replace the PSM here with that foreground, and I'll just slide this over a little bit more here as well. I could organize those however I want. I mean, you could have these so that they were set up in 3 here or whatever you wanted. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and put them all to the side. Now, in order to make these work like I want them to, I'm going to have an indicator across the back. It's going to be a bar that will actually fill up and drop down when we do this. To make this happen, I'm going to use a new kind of UI element called a UI panel. It's a little strange to start with. Let me show you what's going on here as I build this. I'm going to use GameObject UI panel. Where are you, panel? Panel. And what that does is it makes a big panel that completely fills the screen, which of course is not what I want to have happen. What I am going to do though is let's come in here and I'm going to center my pivot and my anchor right down in the bottom center. Now here I can start to do a bunch of things. What I am going to do is I'm going to reduce the width of this to a certain amount, and I'm going to change the height to 100 pixels. Now this seems kind of arbitrary for now, and it is. That 100 pixels, the width doesn't really matter. That 100 pixels is just going to make it a little bit easier for us to do some math later. All right, so with this panel, let's call this one the RPG. Let's call it the RPG bar. And I'm going to take this RPG bar and make it a child of the RPG foreground. Now I'm just going to do this for a second, because then what that means is that now if I just zero that out, then we'll see that that bar and where it actually exists. Now I'm going to do a little bit of scaling here, so I'm going to use the scale tool to scale that and go ahead and move it so that we can see where it would be in relationship to that indicator there. So I might scale it out a little bit in X as well. Now notice that because I'm scaling, that my width and height are still set to 100, and that's really kind of what I'm after because I'm going to want to keep that at 100. Okay, so I'm going to change the color here to green, so 0 in the red, all the way in the green, 0 in the blue. And I'm going to turn the alpha so that it's all the way up. Now, of course, this doesn't work because it's in front. But what I'll do is I'm going to reorganize these a little bit. The way that UI works is that it starts from the top, and then as it moves down, it draws the next thing next. So for instance, if we had the RPG bar first in the list and then the foreground after that, then the foreground draws on top of that. Now what this means is that with this bar, if I want to and I change that height, right, then I can have that bar come up and down. All right, so I'll have that one. I'm going to duplicate that bar. This one is going to be my PSM bar. The PSM bar, I'm going to make sure that it's behind that, and I'm also going to come and position that so that it sits back here like that. All right, so here's the basics of how these will work. So now we've got these set up. What I'll be able to do is, the easiest thing to do is going to be, as I'm going to use something called size delta, which will allow me to change that size. I could also change the color as well. The idea will be is that when I fire the PSM, for instance, then I'll drop the size down here, and then every certain amount of time after that, I'll go ahead and change that height. And as I change that height, then we'll fill the thing back up until we can actually fire it again. So let's look at how the code will work for this. So in the same way that with the pistol, we created this can fire pistol mechanism, we're going to do the same thing with the RPG. So I'll create a public Boolean that I'm going to call can fire RPG. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and do one public Boolean for can fire PSM, because these two methods are going to be almost identical. Now, when at the start of the game, I'm going to go ahead and set can fire PSM to be equal to true, and can fire RPG to be equal to true, so that both of those are ready to go. All right, so let's come back down here. So here's all of our work that we did with the pistol. I'm just going to narrow that down. Here, as we start to look at the RPG, then this should all look familiar because we built it last time. The idea that we clone a rigid body, give that rigid body some velocity, and then we've already got started this reload RPG. So I'm going to come down to this reload RPG and make use of some of the same things that happen here. Now, the way that we were doing reload pistol is that we were putting the pistol pivot away. So I'm going to go ahead and do that same thing here. As soon as I hit that, as I fire that, I'm going to go ahead and tell it to not put the pistol pivot away, but instead put the RPG pivot RPG away, so it puts that down. And then what I'm going to do is immediately start to take that bar and reduce its size. So let's make sure that we're tracking both of those. So what we'll do is create some game objects to store those panels. So let's make a game object that we'll call RPG indicator. And let's make one called public game object called the PSM indicator. So we've got both of those really quick. All right, so we'll come back down to our reload the RPG. And then what I'll do is when I'm putting that down, I'll immediately take the RPG indicator. And what I'm going to do is go and get the component on that is type rect transform. Now the rect transform, this is just like doing dot transform, but the rect transform is actually this component right here, this rect transform. And so we can start to talk to these different attributes that exist here. So I'll take the rect transform and I'm going to use something called size delta. Size delta allows you to then define a new vector 2 because there's only two axes on the width and the height here for that size. I'm going to use a vector 2 and use those two values. So my width is 74 and my height 74, and then my height I'm going to immediately reduce that to 0. So that will drop it down to 0. Now I could also do some other things. Let's go ahead and use RPG indicator. And let's get the component on it that is, let's see, probably image. Let's get the image on it, and then let's change the color on it to be a new color of red at 1, 0 for green, and 0 for blue, so that it turns the thing red. Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll wait for a second, and then what I'm going to start to do is grow that thing back up. So let's come back over here, and I'm going to copy that, paste that in here, and then I'll shift that up to 20. Let's go ahead and grab all of this. 40, 60, 80, 100. Okay, so we'll change this to 40, 60, 80, 100. So that grows it back up to the regular size. And then when it's back up to 100, I'm going to go ahead and let that thing go green again. So we'll do 0 here and 1 here. Now I could put this line in between each of these so it slowly changed to green as it went up. But for now, we'll go ahead and just set it like that. Okay, so once we're done with that, then the dummy rocket will turn on again. What we do want to make sure, though, is that as soon as we start all of this, we want to make sure that we can't fire the rocket. Let's do this first thing. We'll set can fire RPG to false. And then we'll make sure that if active weapon is RPG and can fire RPG, it's the only time that it will do that. So meanwhile, that means when we fire it, we're not going to be able to fire it again until we finish this RPG, and then the last thing we'll do is make can fire RPG equal to true again. All right, so let's save that and go take a look in Unity. So after compiling, let's come back and look at our script holder. Our script holder now will need to know a few things. You can see the RPG has that new canfire RPG, but it needs to know who the RPG indicator is. So I'll grab the RPG bar and go ahead and drop it in there so that we can see how that works. All right, so let's give it a play. I'm going to swap to the rocket launcher when oops, that's the PSM. 2 is the rocket launcher. When I fire that, then you can see how the UI drops to 0 and then over time grows back up and then turns to green. Now if I come back and pull that back up again, then we can see that thing there. If I were to pull it back up again, you see how it doesn't have a rocket on it. Then we only get that dummy rocket there kind of at the end. But what this does is that now if I keep firing when this is still the active weapon, then I'm not able to fire that weapon again. Okay, so let's expand that for the PSM. We'll do essentially the same thing. Let's go ahead and I'm just going to grab all of this stuff like that. Do we have a reload PSM? We don't. So let's make another IEnumerator that we're going to call reload PSM. And then into there, I'm going to paste all of this stuff, just do a little bit of adjustment here. Let's come in here, and this should be pivot PSM because we'll want to put the PSM away. You might choose not to put the PSM away if you don't want to. PSM indicator. Let's go ahead and just start to replace all of these. PSM indicator, and we don't need to worry about the dummy rocket. And of course here what we want to do is can fire PSM so that that's set up. And then maybe we want to make this one a little bit slower. Let's do, I mean, you can't miss with this weapon. So let's do that it takes a much longer time to actually charge it back up. Maybe 10 seconds is too long. You'll have to figure this out as you're balancing 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. So 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. Okay, and so that should do all of that. Again, we need to make sure and get this Boolean set up. So let's come back up to the area where we fire the PSM. So here, if we fire the PSM and can fire PSM is true, then let's immediately turn can fire PSM off so that we can't fire it again. Let's go ahead and instantiate that and then start the coroutine. that is reload PSM. All right, so we'll go ahead and save that, come back to Unity. After compiling, it's going to ask us to tie some stuff back together. So let's make sure that the PSM indicator is built correctly. So we'll take, where are you, PSM bar. Let's drag that down there. So what will happen now is that when we play the game, I hit 3 to do my pigeon-seeking missile, and I fire that pigeon-seeking missile. You can see the indicator slowly going back up, indicating that I can't fire yet, can't fire yet. Now I can fire, so I can pull that back up. If I pull up 3 and I'm clicking the mouse as fast as I can, it's not letting me because the can fire PSM is not there. All right, that's all we're going to do, and this is wraps up what this is going to be. Remember, the specifics of how this game should work are on the forums. Make sure that you understand carefully the instructions. We're missing some things here. For instance, we should have a score and we should have a high score. If you're going to use some timer, then you can make sure you use the timer. And if we have some sort of remaining targets, depending on how you plan to design the game, then we should have some indicator there. Remember to have a game start script and a game over script so that all those things are set. But at this point, you should have all of the mechanics to how to make this work. All right, thanks. Can't wait to see them.